Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for listening. Today, I'm joined by Jonathan Jacobi, who is a master hacker, CTFer worker for a cool company. So yeah, Jonathan, I'll just turn it over to you right away to introduce yourself and let people know about your.
Yeah, so thank you for the introduction. My name is Jonathan. I work for a company named Daz, and I do some CTFs. I have a lot of background, and I started when I was pretty young. When I was 13 years old, I started doing computer science and my degree, and that turned into building one of the biggest and most dominant hacking teams in the world, in a capture the flag format. When we were teenagers, we were like an international team. Everyone was super passionate about security and about hacking and all that stuff. So we were a few teenagers back in the day, and now our team, like in 2023, was ranked number one in the world in the hacking scene at CTFs, and we were competing in some of the biggest competitions and winning some of them too. And other than that, I'm an 8200 graduate. I worked at Microsoft back in the day, Microsoft and Checkpoint. I was the youngest Microsoft employee. And now I do remediation at Daz, helping security teams and companies solve their security issues at scale.
Yeah, that's awesome. Can you start even by just explaining? I remember, so Jonathan and I were at Defcon in Las Vegas, and there was a group of I'm trying to say, of well-liquored people who came up and were trying for the best of their life to understand what you do from a hacking perspective, and trying to understand like what a hacking tournament would even be, or to be ranked in CTF. Like, what's the actual mechanism behind saying that you're like part of a well-ranked hacker group like that?
It's a good question. Essentially, there's the CTFs work as follows. So you have some competitions from like weekends and so on, and people like can organize their tournaments by themselves. And each tournament has a point, like points that it gives to the winners. And there's a website called CTF Time which tracks the teams with the most points. So, for example, our team like won some major competitions, whether it be it like we just got second place at Defcon, and then like major competitions as well, and just tracks down like teams and how well they did. And essentially, how the competition itself works is you have so there's two types of competitions, of hacking competitions. One of them is just you have a lot of challenges that you have to solve, like whether it be it finding vulnerabilities and exploiting them. There is also types of like web hacking. There's also types of cryptography and so on and so forth. And you have to solve as many challenges as you can. You get points for the challenge. So this is what's called the Jeopardy style CTF. And there's another style of hacking competition which is called attack and defense. So this is what we just participated in, and I just told James about it too, which is essentially you have services and servers that you own, and you have to protect them, protect your own assets, and also in parallel attack the other team's assets, which is becoming an interesting dynamic, because other teams can see how you attack them, and you can see how they attack you, and they can see how you patch things, and it's becoming a kind of a strategy mind game. Those are the two types.
The things that come to mind probably for people who haven't seen it is like hacker games type stuff where, you've got your three screens and just like matrix code flying around. But is there a way to even just casually observe some of this stuff? Because I feel like it would be super intimidating for most people to just sign up like, I'm going to go 1v1 with Jonathan on some Linux box somewhere. But like, what's the actual way that you can sort of like get experience with it to just kind of see what's going on?
Great question. I was also having this exact struggle when I was younger. So I was also very much buzzed by the like hacking sounds amazing, and how do I get into it, and where do you even start? And I remember watching Mr. Robot back in the day, and I was like, wow, that's cool. How do I get to do these kind of things? And what actually triggered me and started helping me get into this world was kind of getting engagement. So I started by following a lot of people on Twitter. Twitter is a great resource for learning, and a lot of the cybersecurity community revolves around there. And also people are very helpful and willing to help. So following people on Twitter and kind of keeping up to date with posts of like Project Zero and other hacking teams and so on, but also kind of doing it by yourself as well. You don't want to just be in the theory kind of world. You want to kind of get your hands dirty. So there's like a website called CTFtime.org, which basically hosts and manages all the capture the flag contests and all hacking contests in the world. And you can see when there's a capture the flag happening, you can see other like past events that took place, and you can see the solutions for them, which is pretty cool because at the beginning I was very bad. Like I couldn't solve anything. But what I did, I kind of went on this website and read solutions. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And this way I got better. And the consistency is what kind of made me, consistency of trying to solve things is what made me be able to do that. So those are the kind of two recommendations. One is Twitter and one is like getting your hands dirty using actual competitions.
Yeah. And when it comes to actually like trying to learn that, do you think that's the best way to do it, is to just start trying different CTFs? Or is there something like, if you wish you could go back in time and learn with like a little more structure around, like, should I take a programming class first to understand like low level languages, or should I go straight into like, hack the box type stuff?
That's it. So I think that there's a concept called analysis paralysis. You don't want to just prepare yourself for too long because then you wouldn't do the actual thing. But on the other hand, you might not just want to do it like without any preparation at all. So I personally think that basic understanding, like in like programming languages like C and like web like JavaScript and PHP, and assembly and maybe in Python as well.
Just real quick, for the record, Jonathan only said PHP because we were talking about Laravel before the call.
That's true.
Don't hold it against him for referencing it.
Yeah, it's in my cache. I had to. So I think like basic understanding in those like programming languages would be enough. You don't need to be the most expert in those fields, because what happens is when you know the basics and you try it again in this like kind of like find a vulnerability in a C like kind of snippet, C program, and then you don't know something, you just Google it, and because you know the basics, you'd be able to kind of maneuver and understand what to learn. You don't need to know everything from beforehand, but kind of learn it as you do it.
Yeah,
so
do you think?
That's my take.
Sorry. Yeah, I feel like with a lot of Linux exploit type stuff, learning C is sort of like a brick wall that I feel like you can just run into. I mean, do you feel the same way, that just because Python's so easy to learn, it's so many people's like first language, and then maybe JavaScript on the website, like it can be really jarring, at least in my experience, to suddenly start thinking in terms of like binaries and memory manipulation and what's happening. It's just it feels very different to me.
There is a like a fundamental difference between like C and Python and the way you think of things. But I personally think that if you want to get into it and you know like Python, you'd be able to manage, because I think there's a lot of like kind of intersection of concepts that you can, maybe it's not exactly the same, but the essence is very resembling. Like understanding how arrays work and how like things like that. Yeah, maybe like understanding that like in C it's a little different because you have the underlying memory and so on. But the concepts of things that are in memory and one after the other is still the same. So there is a lot of kind of worry around whether getting to C into low level languages like assembly and so on, because after all, it is kind of more like close to the metal kind of things but I don't think there is a really good reason for that, because in essence it's all kind of the same kind of understand how the languages work, understand how the concepts work, and yeah, of course there's maybe more nuances to see, but I'm pretty confident people can take on this if they took on Python.
Okay. And then I was also really helped by something we had talked about around the like categorizing the types of CTF, because a lot of times, even whether you look at like a Defcon puzzle and it's more like a cryptography algorithmic type of puzzle thing versus like using burp to exploit web versus this attack defense stuff, I think it's just really helpful if you could break down like those categories that exist of different kinds of CTF, even just as a way for people to realize like, if you enter a CTF competition, you might feel totally, or not even a competition, but just enter one to do it. You could probably quickly feel like, shoot, I have no idea on this stuff.
Yeah, so there's a few categories that are very like commonly like capture the flag harness are very commonly broken into those categories. So one of them is what people call punnables. So you have like a box you have to attack, find a vulnerability, exploit it, do all this shenanigans and get a root access on it and then read the flag. So the idea behind this is kind of vulnerability research and exploitation. And this is one great, and this is one of my favorites personally, like biggest pillars of CTFs. There's another pillar, which is actually called reverse engineering. So you have a program, sometimes it's like a binary you get, sometimes it's you do it black box, which is also pretty cool in my opinion. Which you basically have to understand how things work to reverse engineer it and to understand how a secret flag is generated. This is reverse engineering. Then you have cryptography, which is pretty self-explanatory, but also like essentially there's an encryption mechanism that encrypts a flag. Sometimes you get the encrypted flag and you have to kind of break it. You have to understand what is the secret that is encrypted. Another great pillar is web. Just like you said, web hacking. Have a web server or like an admin that visits a website sometimes, and you want to steal his information or to run code on the website or something like that. So it's like essentially web hacking, which is where you would use burp and all those kind of tools that help you with web hacking. There's another pillar which is called forensics, which you basically have to do like forensics analysis and to understand like file systems, whereas like a secret is hidden in a file system. Where would you find it? And some things around that. And those are like kind of the main, and there's a lot of miscellaneous, which is basically random. You have random things that are not categorized very easily. You just have to solve them. It's like riddles. Essentially, it's riddles. So those are the biggest categories that there are. Those like most of the times those like fall into like the Jeopardy style CTFs, Jeopardy style hacking competitions fall into those kind of categories. And in a category of attack and defense, it's a little different because there you don't know most of the times what is the issue. And then you just get a service. You are responsible for a server. You have no idea what the vulnerability is. You have no idea how people can attack you. And it's like, good luck. You have to figure it out. You have to understand maybe it's a web problem. Maybe it's a cryptography problem. Maybe it's a punnable problem, like an exploitation problem. And you have to kind of maneuver the world without knowing much and then protect your infrastructure and attack others' infrastructure in the meantime. So those are more like in the dark kind of a competition.
Yeah. And that's, how long did it take from going, like you talked about early on being okay with not getting it right away or whatever, like how long is it for someone to start seeing success between like, oh, I entered this CTF and I got 0 out of 10 versus like, oh, I can actually solve, 3 to 4 of these and I'm not just like super confused the whole time.
So I personally, it took me a while. And like, I remember like there were like Friday nights, and I was like sitting on my computer, and instead of like, I was like, I am like laser focused on succeeding on success here. And I remember like really having a lot of failures in the beginning, and like there were like 2-3 competitions which I didn't solve anything. Like literally I was like shooting at the stars and like missing totally. But I think one thing that really helped me was reading how people took their solutions and how people built their solutions. But not only that, but I was very active. I reached out to people on Twitter, and on back in the day it wasn't Discord, it was IRC, which was used to communicate and capture the flag contest. So I used to reach out to people in DMs and ask them, hey, how did you do it? And I think that's really helped me being active and like not just waiting for, the solution to fall on me. So just actively try to search for the answer. And kind of not being afraid to reach out to people and not being afraid to kind of like be shown as like the one that didn't manage to solve the problem. But it took me, I think, about 3 or 4 capture flags of like literally no challenges solved at all until I even managed to start getting the engines moving. When it started moving, I was like, okay, I'm starting to see more progress and starting to understand better. And even then, I still talk to people and ask them about their solution. But I think it was like it took me quite a while. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's just for people who may be like, one of the advantages of having you on is being like not just a mediocre like CTF pen tester, which is still really hard. So I don't mean that in like you're just a mediocre CTF guy. Like you're probably better than me at it if you're listening and you're in the middle somewhere. But what did you find was really the difference between like, I feel okay at this to this really like top tier level group doing it? Like what are some of the things that move someone from one category to another?
So I personally think it was the passion. All my teammates were super passionate about what they did, and like it was more than a hobby. We're like talking about it on we were talking on Discord. So talking about it on Discord like a lot of during the day and almost all the time. But also it kind of we took it out of the competitions too. Like there were things we researched together. And when I was working at Microsoft back in the day, I also was researching like Microsoft products, and I felt like such a great passion towards what I'm doing, towards security, towards vulnerabilities, kind of understanding this cybersecurity scene. It was this passion slash obsession, I guess, that took it from being like doing it as a hobby to like being like good at it in the top tiers. And it wasn't easy because it was like some people like kind of like look at it as, why do you do this like with such great obsession or like passion? Don't you see that this is like a hobby to people? Don't you see this as like a side thing? But I think that like the thing that made me continue with this is that I understood that I see this much more than a hobby. It was also my job. It was also the thing I'm doing when I go to sleep. I scroll Twitter and I read like a blog posts and so on. And I think what's allowed me to do this like jump was the great passion and really interest in succeeding.
Yeah, and then how does that connect to, because I feel like there is definitely a group of people that really the idea of like hacking is what gets them into security, and they love the CTF pen testing offensive security side. But then there can be difficulty, from what I can tell, transitioning that into like, now I can get a job.
Okay.
Like you might have a leaderboard positioning, but then it's like, how do you actually like get a job out of that? And so how have you seen people connect that bridge from like CTF person to actual security job?
Actually, that's an interesting question because just recently when we've been to Vegas together, I went to the Defcon competition finals. What was very, very interesting for me to see is that a lot of the cybersecurity scene, like the hacking scene, kind of fed itself. So there was like startup company, two more friends built, and they hire people from the CTF scene and from the hacking scene because they know that those are like people that are really passionate about what they're doing and they really love it. And first of all, like this opens up a lot of doors to people. Like just the matter of passion and connections to people that are in this scene and leading this scene just opens up doors. So this is the first thing. Aside from opening up doors just by knowing people and things like that, you also obtain really useful knowledge. Like for example, like for someone doing security engineering and doing like like defensive kind of things and like building up like an enterprise security kind of solutions, you might want to like might be interested in moving into and learning into the hacking scene. And doing this transition is not that like it's not that big because you have an understanding about how like cybersecurity works, and you have an understanding what is this kind of landscape. So doing this jump, once you have the basics, like we talked about, like understanding Python and C a little bit and assembly a little bit, like doing this jump is not that big of a like a challenge as much as you would expect, I think. Given the interest and passion, I think doing this jump would be easier because you know the landscape. So yeah.
That's something else that comes to mind, is just the diversity in cybersecurity of like the kinds of interviews that can happen. Like I interviewed at one place a long time ago that like they explicitly would not hire someone for an AppSec position they had open unless they had like a CTF hacking background. Like they want, and I'm just seeing my dog like roll over comically. they were like asking about like burp suite usage, exploit experience. Like this was explicitly the stuff that they were looking for. But then at another job that's almost like for the same like title, like AppSec security engineer, they were just asking questions about like cryptography and cloud encryption. And people are trying to solve specific problems usually when they hire someone. And so it can be tough, I think, to like, you might go into an interview with like one background and it's just totally not at all a fit. Like you're going in as this like low level C programming person, but they're like, oh, we want like a JavaScript, basically vulnerability remediation person. And I think that can create a lot of discouragement if you go into one interview and it's like totally different from another, but that's just the reality of it. But I think you're absolutely right that in general, the biggest problem you would have is like being too good at the actual security part in a way that a lot of enterprise security teams don't actually want that. Because if you know better, like you'll look at a giant list of CVEs and be like, oh, these are like not exploitable because, you know, this just
That's
doesn't
true.
exist on this. Yeah. Like, you know, too much when like the industry to kind of like do its thing needs like, I'm going to create tickets for the devs to go patch this stuff and we got to just do the workflow because compliance says we should. I mean, so do you struggle at all? I mean, you work for DAS, obviously, which is doing vulnerability management at scale and a million other things just to make sure I pick the right acronym. But like, how do you connect even knowing how a lot of these exploits work to like helping with the day-to-day struggle of just like doing vulnerability management and stuff?
So I think one example is just what you mentioned. So having a better understanding of the actual data, like you're like in some way you're more contextualized. You know more about the problem set. You know more about what is dangerous, how it is dangerous, and so on and so forth. So this kind of gives you a tool to kind of like a magnifying glass. You know when things are interesting and when things are not interesting. You have a better kind of sense of like filtering out things. So this is one thing. Another thing that is interesting is if you're talking about enterprise security teams, and maybe like from my position, it's also interesting to see how I kind of use my skill set for devs, like two different perspectives. So let's talk about the first one, which was, I think what you said is a great example. Another great example is building up kind of like tools, internal tools, if you think like to help you kind of do those filters that we talked about, that you have a better sense for, because you know much better about the details and what's dangerous and what's not dangerous. It's going to help build tools internally, but also like if you're talking about enterprise security, also maybe pen testing. If you want to do pen testing, I think being a pen tester would be like much more easy if you know the details. So I think it's a spectrum of things that the essence of why you're going to be better all derives from the fact that you're more contextualized and you know much more about the problem and what is danger in a sense. And if we're talking about like security companies, I think why like being very good at the technical level and understanding the problem is you understand. It's a pretty similar because you're more contextualized. You know how to approach problems that are not interesting and that are interesting, and how to filter out like okay, this kind of problems are not interesting, and how do we build a solution that filters them out? How do we put more emphasis on things that are dangerous? How do we kind of build around that? So being in the details and understanding the kind of problem gives you the kind of visibility and like kind of superpower to build the right thing, uh, and not just beat around the bush of things that are not interesting and so on.
Yeah, that's definitely been helpful in my own experience with it too. Two final questions. One, I want to just ask general, you've mentioned CTF time, but are there other places to go as well to either learn or get involved in CTFs in some way?
Yeah, so there's a good friend of mine. His name is Live Overflow. He's a YouTuber. He really dedicates a lot of his time to building up cybersecurity content, whether it be pen testing, whether it be at vulnerability research, like really, really wide. He is a good, really good friend of mine. He's a great person and he builds amazing content. I can also say that I personally learned from him a lot when I was younger. So he is a very great resource. So this is one thing I would do. And there's a few more like good YouTubers, John Hammond, Stack Smashing, a few more. I think like nowadays we're pretty lucky to have content very easily accessible for us. Internet is a magic. So like utilizing it and using this to become a better version of your cybersecurity self is kind of called for. You have to do it. Those kind of those three recommendations and to become a better CTF player, I think are very good. And kind of following Twitter, like kind of there's a lot of CTF teams on Twitter that kind of post whenever they're building up a competition, a hacking competition. A lot of CTF players, a lot of hackers, like vulnerability researchers and so on, that are posting consistently their research. They're like Project Zero, for example, of Google, like one of the best security teams in the world, consistently post their stuff on Twitter, and then you can watch their, like, read their blog. So essentially kind of being up to date with what's going on, whether it be CTF time, whether it be at YouTube and so on. I think this is like my 2 cents of advice.
Yep. And then where can people go to like follow you more directly as well?
So I'm available on Twitter, Jonathan J, like with a zero, the Jonathan. I'm available on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me. Like really feel free to do that. One of the things that I feel obligated to do is when I was younger, I reached out to people and they were all super helpful. So I kind of feel obligated to help out people. And I think this is what builds this cybersecurity community to be super strong, to be helpful and kind to people. So if you have any questions, any thoughts, anything, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or on LinkedIn. I'm very available.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. I hope it was helpful for everyone, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.